In 1866, Fyodor Dostoevsky revealed why intelligent people commit the stupidest crimes. He discovered something that would terrify modern psychologists. The smarter you are, the better you become at lying to yourself. Crime and Punishment wasn't just a novel. It was a psychological autopsy of the criminal mind. Dostoevsky had cracked the code on how brilliant people destroy themselves through their own twisted logic. But here's what nobody tells you about criminal psychology. The crime isn't what destroys them. It's the justification. Meet Raskolnikov, a brilliant university student who convinces himself that murder is not only acceptable, but necessary. Sound familiar? In 2019, Adam Neumann convinced himself that massive fraud was actually elevating the world's consciousness. He turned a simple office rental business into a $47 billion delusion. Both men had the same fatal flaw. They were too smart for their own good. Dostoevsky understood something that modern psychology is just beginning to grasp. Intelligence without moral grounding becomes a weapon against yourself. The more brilliant you are, the more elaborate your self-deception becomes. Raskolnikov doesn't just wake up and decide to kill someone. He spends months building an intellectual fortress around his crime. He creates theories, writes essays, develops entire philosophical systems to justify what he's about to do. This is the dark psychology truth that Dostoevsky revealed. Your mind will work harder to justify your wrong choices than it ever worked to make right ones. Adam Neumann didn't start WeWork planning to commit fraud. He started with a vision of changing the world. But somewhere along the way, his intelligence became his enemy. Every lie became a strategic pivot. Every manipulation became inspiring leadership. Every crime became disrupting the industry. Here's what's going to happen in the next 20 minutes. I'm going to reveal Dostoevsky's 3 dark psychology discoveries that explain why intelligent people self-destruct. Not just what happens in Crime and Punishment, but how these same psychological traps operate in your daily life. By the end, you'll understand why Dostoevsky wrote, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart." So let me ask you, are you using your intelligence to see the truth clearly? Or are you using it to build better lies? Before I reveal Dostoevsky's first dark psychology discovery, you need to understand what happened when he studied real criminals. Because what he found will completely change how you think about intelligence and morality. In 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested for revolutionary activities. He spent 4 years in a Siberian prison camp, surrounded by murderers, thieves, and con artists. But here's what shocked him. Most of these criminals weren't stupid. They were clever, articulate, and often more intelligent than their victims. This discovery shattered everything he thought he knew about crime. The stupid criminals got caught immediately. The intelligent ones, they destroyed themselves in ways that were far more sophisticated and painful. Raskolnikov represents this perfectly. He's not some mindless thug. He's a former law student who speaks multiple languages and writes philosophical essays. His intelligence isn't a protection against crime. It's what makes his crime possible. Here's Dostoevsky's first dark psychology truth. Intelligence amplifies your capacity for self-deception. Think about how Raskolnikov justifies murder. He doesn't just say, "I need money." He creates an entire moral framework. He divides humanity into 2 categories: ordinary people who must obey moral rules, and extraordinary people who are above such limitations. Sound familiar? Adam Neumann didn't just rent office space. He convinced himself he was leading a physical social network that would elevate the world's consciousness. A simple real estate scam became a mission to transform humanity. The more intelligent you are, the more convincing your lies become. To others, but especially to yourself. Dostoevsky realized that criminals don't lack intelligence. They use their intelligence in the wrong direction. Instead of facing uncomfortable truths, they build elaborate mental structures to avoid them. This is why smart people often make the dumbest mistakes. Their intelligence becomes a tool for rationalization instead of recognition. Raskolnikov spends weeks planning the perfect murder. He calculates timing, studies the victim's habits, prepares alibis. But he never once honestly asks himself, "Am I becoming a monster?" Because that question would destroy his entire intellectual framework, and intelligent people hate having their frameworks challenged. Adam Neumann did the same thing. He surrounded himself with people who reinforced his delusions. He created a corporate culture where questioning his vision was treated as disloyalty. Intelligence became a weapon against reality. But here's where Dostoevsky's insight gets disturbing. Once you start using your intelligence to justify wrong actions, you can't stop. The lies have to get bigger. The justifications have to get more elaborate. This brings us to Dostoevsky's second dark psychology discovery. And I have to warn you, this one explains why intelligent people don't just commit crimes, they torture themselves in the process. Dostoevsky's second dark psychology discovery is the most terrifying. Guilt doesn't prevent crime, it amplifies it. Here's what happens in Crime and Punishment that reveals this truth. Raskolnikov commits the perfect murder. No witnesses, no evidence, no way to get caught. But instead of feeling relieved, he starts destroying himself from the inside. His guilt doesn't work like normal guilt. It becomes a psychological torture device that he operates himself. Most people think guilt stops you from doing bad things. Dostoevsky discovered the opposite. For intelligent people, guilt becomes proof that they're special. Their suffering becomes evidence of their superiority. Raskolnikov doesn't feel guilty because he killed someone. He feels guilty because he's not strong enough to handle being a killer. He thinks his conscience is a weakness, not a warning. This is exactly what happened to Adam Neumann. When WeWork started falling apart, he didn't feel guilty about the fraud. He felt guilty about not being visionary enough to make it work. His suffering became proof that he was attempting something too advanced for others to understand. Dostoevsky realized that intelligent criminals don't just ignore their conscience, they weaponize it. The guilt becomes part of the crime. Raskolnikov starts believing that his psychological pain makes him more evolved than ordinary people who never face such moral complexity. Here's the psychological trap. Instead of letting guilt guide them back to right behavior, intelligent criminals use guilt to prove they're profound. Normal people feel guilty and change their behavior. Intelligent criminals feel guilty and write poetry about it. Raskolnikov begins seeing his mental anguish as evidence of his deep, complex nature. His suffering becomes a source of pride. He's not just a murderer, he's a tortured genius, grappling with the deepest questions of human existence. Adam Neumann did this constantly. When investors questioned WeWork's business model, he didn't see it as legitimate criticism. He saw it as proof that his vision was too revolutionary for conventional thinking. The guilt became a drug. The more he suffered, the more special he felt. Dostoevsky understood something that modern psychology is just discovering. Intelligent people can become addicted to their own psychological pain. But this leads to Dostoevsky's most disturbing discovery. Because once you start using guilt as proof of your superiority, you need bigger crimes to generate more guilt. The psychological cycle becomes self-perpetuating. And that brings us to the darkest truth in Crime and Punishment. The reason why intelligent people don't just commit one crime, they build entire systems of crime. Dostoevsky's third dark psychology discovery explains why intelligent criminals never stop. They build rationalization systems that become psychological prisons. Raskolnikov doesn't just justify one murder. He creates an entire philosophy that makes murder not only acceptable, but necessary. And once he builds this system, he becomes trapped inside it. Here's how the rationalization prison works. Every wrong action requires a justification, but that justification makes the next wrong action easier. Eventually, you're not just defending your crimes, Your crimes are defending your worldview. Raskolnikov starts with a simple idea. Some people are more valuable than others. The old pawnbroker is worthless. He is valuable. Therefore, killing her benefits society. But that logic doesn't stop with one murder. If some people are worthless, then many people are worthless. If he's valuable enough to kill one person, he's valuable enough to kill many people. Adam Neumann followed the exact same pattern. He started by telling small lies about WeWork's business model, but each lie required bigger lies to support it. Eventually, he wasn't just lying about profits, he was lying about reality itself. Dostoevsky realized that intelligent people don't just commit crimes. They commit crimes that require them to commit more crimes. The rationalization becomes the real prison, not the physical consequences, the psychological ones. Raskolnikov could leave Russia. He could hide his identity. He could escape all external punishment. But he can't escape the logic system he created to justify his actions. Every day, he has to choose, admit his philosophy was wrong, or commit to it more completely. This is why he starts planning more murders, not because he wants to kill people, but because his rationalization system demands it. The logic has to be consistent. Adam Neumann faced the same choice. When WeWork's valuation started falling, he could have admitted the problems and fixed them. Instead, he doubled down. He raised more money, made bigger promises, built more elaborate justifications, because admitting the problems would mean admitting his entire worldview was built on lies. Dostoevsky understood that for intelligent people, being wrong isn't just embarrassing, it's existentially threatening. Their identity becomes tied to their rationalization system. Breaking the system means breaking themselves. But here's the most disturbing part. The rationalization prison has no walls. It's entirely self-constructed and self-maintained, which means it's also entirely voluntary. Raskolnikov could walk out of his psychological prison at any moment. All he has to do is tell the truth. But that would mean admitting he's not special, not extraordinary, not above ordinary moral rules. And for an intelligent person who has based their entire identity on being superior, that truth becomes more terrifying than any external punishment. Here's what Dostoevsky discovered about how intelligent criminals finally break free from their psychological prisons. They don't escape through logic. They escape through love. The most powerful scene in Crime and Punishment isn't the murder. It's when Raskolnikov finally confesses to Sonia, a prostitute who represents everything his philosophy says is worthless. But she doesn't judge him. She doesn't analyze his motives. She doesn't try to understand his philosophical system. She simply loves him despite what she's done. And that love destroys his entire rationalization structure in seconds. Here's why this moment reveals Dostoevsky's deepest psychological insight. Intelligent people build elaborate justification systems because they're terrified of being loved for who they actually are, not who they pretend to be. Raskolnikov created his extraordinary person philosophy because he was afraid he was actually ordinary. All his complex theories were just elaborate ways of avoiding the simple truth. He wanted to be accepted. Adam Neumann did the same thing. All his talk about elevating consciousness and changing the world was really about proving he was worth loving. But he was afraid that if people saw him as just a regular guy renting office space, they would reject him. So he built bigger and bigger lies to make himself seem more valuable. Dostoevsky realized that the criminal mind isn't really about committing crimes. It's about avoiding vulnerability. The psychological truth that destroys rationalization systems isn't complex. It's embarrassingly simple. You are already worthy of love exactly as you are. But intelligent people hate simple truths. They prefer complex lies. When Sonia loves Raskolnikov without needing him to be extraordinary, his entire philosophy collapses, because he realizes he never needed to prove his worth through superiority. He was always enough. This is why Raskolnikov's redemption doesn't come through intellectual revelation. It comes through emotional connection. Adam Newman's downfall happened the same way. When investors stopped believing his stories and started seeing him as just another entrepreneur who had made mistakes, he finally had to face reality. The elaborate justifications couldn't survive simple human judgment. Dostoevsky understood that the most sophisticated criminal psychology is actually incredibly fragile. It only works in isolation. The moment it encounters genuine human connection, it shatters. Because love doesn't need justification. It doesn't require you to be special or extraordinary or above normal rules. Love accepts you as you are. And for someone who has spent years building complex stories about why they deserve special treatment, that acceptance is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. The psychological prison that seemed so strong was actually made of tissue paper. It just took one person seeing through the walls to make them disappear. But this brings us to the most important question Dostoevsky poses. So here we are. You now understand Dostoevsky's 3 dark psychology truths that explain why intelligent people self-destruct. Intelligence amplifies self-deception. Guilt becomes a source of superiority. Rationalization systems become psychological prisons. But here's the question Dostoevsky really wants you to answer. How many times do you use these same psychological patterns in your daily life? Think about it. When was the last time you used your intelligence to justify something you knew was wrong? When did you last feel proud of your guilt because it proved you were more thoughtful than others? When did you build elaborate explanations for simple bad choices? Crime and punishment isn't really about murder. It's about the small ways we lie to ourselves every day. You don't have to kill someone to fall into Raskolnikov's trap. You just have to convince yourself that normal rules don't apply to you because you're smarter than everyone else. How many times have you thought, other people wouldn't understand my situation? I have reasons that justify this behavior. My circumstances are more complex than they appear. Those are the same thoughts that led Raskolnikov to murder and Adam Neumann to fraud. The dark psychology truth Dostoevsky revealed in Crime and Punishment is that we're all capable of becoming the criminals in our own stories, not through lack of intelligence, but through misusing the intelligence we have. But here's the hope hidden in Dostoevsky's darkness. The psychological prison is voluntary. You can walk out any time you choose to tell the truth. Not the complex, sophisticated truth that makes you look good. The simple, embarrassing truth that makes you human. Raskolnikov's redemption didn't come from solving his philosophical problems. It came from admitting he was just a scared young man who made a terrible mistake. Adam Newman's path forward won't come from better business strategies. It will come from admitting he was just an entrepreneur who got caught up in his own hype. And your freedom won't come from building better justifications for your choices. It will come from making better choices that don't need justification. Because the smartest thing an intelligent person can do is stop trying to be smarter than their conscience. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension. If you're ready to continue this journey, subscribe and check out my video on Marcus Aurelius, the man who solved the universe, where I reveal how the greatest emperor in history discovered the ultimate psychological framework for unshakable inner strength.